We've decided to turn back the clock and share some of our never-before-heard stories from long before we even joined the show. Today, she's been in this very seat for well over a decade. Let's hear Andrea's story. Well, you were made in Glasgow, Andrea, but reared in the Caribbean.
Well, yeah, well, actually, I was made in the Caribbean. Then my parents came back to Glasgow to have me, and then I went back to the Caribbean again. My mum and dad left. My mum and dad had been together since they were 15 and 16. And then my dad he left school with nothing and became an apprentice engineer for a company in Glasgow. And then at 21, he got the opportunity to fly out to the Caribbean and help install some of this machinery that he'd been helped building. Now, my mum and dad, they lived round the corner, like lots of people did in those days, East End of Glasgow, around the corner from my mum's parents. My mum was a hairdresser. They'd never been abroad before.
Wow.
And they went, it was supposed to be for 6 months. Oh. And they ended up staying for many, many years. And so I was conceived in the Caribbean. Then, because my mum was so far gone pregnancy-wise, they actually got a banana boat back from the Caribbean. Literally, they stopped off at all the Caribbean islands picking up bananas, and then literally them on their own. There were other people on the boat. My dad wasn't like rowing.
Doesn't seem fair. I'm really pregnant, does it?
Faster, Betty, faster. And then I was born in Glasgow. I actually arrived a month early during, again, sort of typical East End Glasgow thing, upright piano in my granny's council flat, everyone, dancing and singing, and then my mum went into labour with me, and I arrived.
At home?
No, what's so funny, my other granny worked for a bakery and had a little van. So I was nearly born in the back of a baker's van on the way.
My goodness, you were the bun in the oven.
Yeah. So how did you end up back in the Caribbean then?
Well, they had come back on annual leave, so because they wanted me to be born in Scotland.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be a boy called Andrew, and I would play for Scotland. So I've been a great disappointment to my parents.
Yeah. So what was it like going up in Trinidad? I mean, it sounds so...
It was wonderful, actually. It was very carefree times, I suppose. I mean, very similar to here. I mean, obviously, there wasn't the same sort of pressures that kids have nowadays. But for me, every day was summer, so that was lovely. You'd come home from school and sort of kick off your shoes and go and ride your bike and all that sort of thing. So it was all very free. But to be honest, for ease, I tell people, I grew up in the Caribbean. But actually, I spent 13 years in the Caribbean because we had a few years out in the middle. We actually moved around. I think if we add it up, I went to 9 different schools. Wow. In 4 different countries over. Wow. That was. Can you spot me? I'm right at the top at the back.
Photo.
That was my school. That was my school photo.
What was that? I mean, I would imagine that would be very. It's hard enough going into school, isn't it, and making friends. When you think even what it's like just to go from primary school to secondary school, was it hard to make connections with people?
It was, because I never moved at the same time as everyone else, so I was always the new girl walking in, midway through a random term. And I had this really strange accent because obviously my parents were Scottish, and my mum and dad, although they left a million years ago, they have this really strong Scottish accent. Yeah. But I spent a lot of my years in the Caribbean, so I had this kind of weird Caribbean, little bit of Scottish accent. I literally talk like that.
I really love your accent because I can always hear that underneath it, can't you?
Yeah.
But was that a struggle for you fitting into different groups? Because just to be, catapulted in as you were and then make friends at a time in your life that you want to fit in more than anything.
Well, we also spent a year in the Philippines, which, again, I kind of missed that out a lot of the time.
I never knew that. Yeah. My brother lived there for years, and you never said to me, I lived there. And I'm like, wow, you lived in the Philippines.
Well, we lived there. Again, my dad...
You never told me.
That's why we're doing this.
I know,
but it's really interesting. I know the place where you live.
Well, I lived in an island called Mindanao, which the Philippines is a load of islands, and it's the one right in the south. And again, my dad's an engineer, so it was to help kind of put a factory together. And if you think about the times then, it was 1978, I think it was. And there was literally nothing around. You flew in on a small plane, and then it was like a 4-hour drive down dirt roads. There were a few houses in the middle of a clearing, literally, and the electricity was run by a generator for only during the day, and then it would get switched off. And so I was taught by my mum for a year. Now, my mum was a hairdresser from Glasgow, and again, this is before internet, so books used to get posted out to us, and it was...
Was that quite hard?
Well, we didn't have any choice. We didn't really know any difference. So we had it was quite odd. But what it was again, kids nowadays wouldn't understand this. We had no TV other than there was one television set that was in this. There was a building that, say, construction workers would come out, fly out and help work and this sort of thing. So they had one, and there were 2 videos. One was Star Wars and one was The Sound of Music. That was all we had for a year. So literally it'd be like, right, girls, what do you want? Star Wars or Sound of Music?
So you must know every word off by heart then.
Well, when I was 11, and by this time we'd moved back to the Caribbean again, and actually in the interim, we then moved back to Scotland for a little while, and I moved into a little village in Ayrshire called Tarbolton.
So you were how old at that point?
I turned 10 then. And it was so
God,
strange.
All that before that age.
Yeah.
Isn't
that
it?
is.
I was like Mowgli out of the Jungle Book, because I was so used to kind of no friends around, kind of doing my own thing, bare feet. I didn't understand British money. So I used to walk, my mum would send me down to the shop, go with bare feet and just kind of hold it out and go like that.
And how did the other kids sort of respond to you then?
I think they thought I was really weird, really strange. And
did they bully you because of your accent or anything? Because you were different. You were different.
I was very different. And when we moved back to Trinidad again, like I say, when I was 10, and then we moved back to the UK properly when I was 15, I did get bullied then. And I think that was because 15 is a really weird age. And I moved into, I suppose it was called the 4th year, but I don't know what year that's called nowadays in terms of how the kids' schooling went. And I got horribly bullied up until the end of sort of GCSEs. But interestingly enough, although I was very different, I remember the very, very first day of school, the teacher, a really bored teacher, reading out all our names on the list, and he went, Andrea McLean, he's literally like that. You know, next, Andrea McLean, and you had to say whether you got your... There you go, that's what I looked like then. Whether you had school dinners...
Great hair.
Thank you very much. School dinners, whether you brought your own packed lunch type thing or whether you went home. And he said, Andrea McLean, and I went, sandwiches. Like... And I can remember he literally...
Just say it, don't sing it.
In slow motion, and he literally looked up like that and went... Who said that? And it didn't twig that my accent was weird. I just thought I'd said the wrong thing and I should have, you know, said school dinner.
We're laughing about it, but because you're telling a great story, but it must have been really hard, that. I mean, I'm imagining having travelled all around and coming into a school and thinking about the potential of making friends and people being cruel, really, to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm laughing about the accent thing and all that sort of stuff, but actually that wasn't why I was bullied. It didn't help. But why I was bullied was because one day in PE, there was a girl being horrifically bullied, like girls can do in the PE changing rooms. And I remember and everyone was just ignoring it. And I was sort of, why is nobody doing anything? So I just went over to them and said, stop it, just leave her alone. And she was clearly never going to be capable of fighting back. There was a big pack of them. And literally, they all went, it's your turn. And that was me for the next 2 years. And it was truly awful, actually. And I never told my parents because I thought they'd feel guilty about bringing me back to the UK because I'd never experienced anything like that in the Caribbean. And also, I kind of thought I could deal with it myself. And it was, like, for example, I'm very creative and quite arty. And I had, at that time, I did my art O-level, wanted to do A-level, and was thinking about doing an art foundation course. And they ripped up all of my artwork. You know, all the stuff that was supposed to, you know, go towards my exams. They would threaten to kill me. They'd follow me home. You know, I never went to the loo the whole time I was at school because they'd follow you
So this
in.
was extreme.
It was awful. It was truly awful. And on the last day of school, they...
Didn't stop you going to school, though.
No, when I think back on it now,
off because of that.
I just used to stagger my timings. So I used to kind of... I would keep busy until I kind of thought, right, I'm sure they must have got bored of waiting now, and then I'd try and walk home on my own. Yeah. Oh. I know. I mean, it sounds awful, but I still kind of carried on.
You were glad to walk out of school for the last day?
No, actually, the last day was awful, because on the last day, they actually said to me, all bets are off, because once school finishes, we won't get in trouble from here. So we're going to wait for you outside of school and we're going to get you. So I literally, it was the last day of school, everyone was like, woo! And I mean, I didn't hide. I just kind of kept busy, and literally for about an hour or 2 hours, and waited till every last person had left the school, and then I went home. But, you know, it's all been all right.
Well, it's not in any way to make light of that situation, because it does sound really extreme, but you have had the last laugh, if you like, because... The year is 1997. Andrea has just started work at GMTV, but what happened next? We'll be finding out with Andrea now for more on her early years. So, how did you end up in London doing the weather?
Oh, it's bonkers. In a nutshell, I literally packed everything I owned into the back of my mum's old Fiesta, drove to London, slept on floors, got myself into a bedsit, went to college, worked for free for anyone who would have me, and I became a journalist, and I was a writer sub, and I worked for a features agency based in London. And then I ended up misreading a job advert, which is hilarious when you think a journalist job is to really keep an eye on detail. And I ended up, it was a weather presenter's job, and I thought that was hilarious, because it wasn't what I wanted to do at all. But I went along, and long story short, I ended up working for the Weather Channel for 18 months. Now, they're an American channel. And what I thought, well, they only offered me a month's work, and I had a staff job. But like you do in your 20s when you're a bit reckless, I thought, do you know what, I'm going to give it a go. So I quit my staff job, and I was production editor of where I was working. And they flew me to Atlanta in America. I trained in the weather, I trained in presentation and all this sort of thing. Came back to the UK, and I worked for the Weather Channel for 18 months. And I loved it. It was a really great training ground. I was trained by the Met Office, so I learned all about the weather and that sort of thing. And then I got made redundant. And being made redundant really sucks, because obviously it came out of the blue. I didn't know it was going to happen. And I obviously really enjoyed where I was working. But what's so strange is sometimes life has a different plan for you. So I'd heard through the grapevine that GMTV were looking for a weather presenter. So I sent my photograph off, you know. And basically, I only got the interview because the secretary of the then editor thought that I was his girlfriend sending her picture in as a joke. Oh. So she opened the letter and went, oh my God, what's so-and-so doing applying to be the weather girl? And then they looked, had a right laugh at my photo, and called me in just for a giggle to see if I looked as much like her in real life.
Shane Ward on us now.
Yeah, literally. I was listening to him thinking the same thing happened to me. So I arrived at the GMTV offices thinking, oh, how exciting, I'm auditioning to be part of this amazing show. And literally they were just laughing at me. And then he said, well, why are you here? You might as well audition. And they didn't give me the job, but what they did do was give me the job of training the person that they actually gave the job to. Because he was a model, he was a very handsome boy. It didn't work out for him. They got me in while they were looking for someone else, and I just kept turning up, and 11 years later I was still there.
I mean, you became so much part of that GMTV family, weren't you? You're really embedded in it. I mean, who were you working with at the time?
Well, I joined... That was my very first day of actually properly doing the weather. I was so scared. I think my voice was like
Think about that jacket now, Andrea.
It looks like it's someone else. It's a bit big, isn't it?
I know. I was there during, well, obviously, Eamon. And what was great was once I'd kind of bedded in there, I let them know I am a trained journalist, I am qualified, I'm capable of a lot more. So on the days that I wasn't doing the weather, I used to... that was Finlay. I was doing a report with Finlay, and I did a lot of travel reporting then as well. That was a bird nearly landed on my head in Australia. So I used to do all sorts of features reporting. I stood in on the sofa, I stood in for Lorraine, and I really cut my teeth on live broadcasting and hosting shows, and that was kind of how I ended up here.
You were saying that you saw Finlay there. Were you not... I don't know whether it would be Finlay or Amy Finlay, I think, because
Both
at
of them.
one
I was
point,
pregnant with both of them.
I remember you doing the weather really heavily pregnant.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was people complaining because you were blanking out Ireland.
Yes.
Is that right?
And that's not even a made-up story. I did look at that. I know. That was Finlay. I was pregnant with Finlay then. Because it was before the days of social media, if people wanted to complain about you, they had to literally ring the show or write in.
Write a letter,
But what
yeah.
they didn't know was the phone was right near my dressing room. So I used to hear the lady answering the phone to all the people complaining about me and wanting me taken off air because they said I was too fat and too big. It really was a thing. They would...
Why is she on air? She's so big, she's blocking out Cornwall.
But, you know, there we are.
Cornwall.
But, yeah.
And the rest. You were particularly large. weren't
Yeah,
you, though?
yeah,
But even I remember that.
But with all that, behind the scenes, personally, things were difficult for you, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it was a difficult time because I got married to my childhood sweetheart. It was the person that I went travelling with, and it was Finlay's dad. We were together for 17 years, and that was a particularly difficult time when that came to an end. I didn't talk about it with anybody, so I was kind of turning up being the cheerful weather girl and you know, hosting the show and all this sort of stuff. And I can remember one day, the only people actually I spoke to was the makeup team, funnily enough, and the people behind the scenes, lots of whom actually are still here today, because I still work with a lot of the same camera crew and sound crew and stuff, you know, 20-odd years later all together. And I can remember one day I was holding it all in. And there's a lovely makeup man called Simon J, who was putting foundation on, and the tears were literally running down here, and I was sitting rock solid so that no one behind in the busy makeup room could see it. And all he did was he'd mop it up, put more foundation on, mop it up, put more foundation on, and then at the end he just kind of squeezed my shoulders, and all I could think was, don't be nice.
Nice to me.
Don't be nice to me, because I've got to go on telly. But actually, GMTV years, they were like my family. I mean, I shared a dressing room with Penny Smith. Now, Penny Smith is bonkers but brilliant, and I loved sharing a room with her. And what we used to do, I suppose I can say this now because GMTV doesn't exist, it's now GMB, was we used to watch The Big Breakfast. We weren't watching GMTV.
It was good for people, to be fair.
And we'd be hunched over watching, and then we'd hear, Andrea, 20 seconds! And I'd literally have to leg it down
You nearly
the
missed the
corridor.
bulletin once.
I nearly missed more than one. Literally, I'd hear the sting, the little bit of music before the weather, and many people watching me now, will remember she always seemed out of breath, that weather girl. Sometimes I would literally go and just make it in time to go, good morning, here's your weather, and have bare feet because I'd been legging it down the corridor because we'd been watching The Big Breakfast.
Oh, God.
Oops.